the podcast with your host, Mike May.
Welcome back, everybody. Today is July 23rd, 2024, and the name of the game is Reset. We knew it was going to be a challenging offseason for the Hurricanes, and it has certainly lived up to the hype. On the previous episode, we talked about the Canes trading Jake Gensel's rights to the Tampa Bay Lightning. I was expecting Gensel to go to July 1st and maximize his leverage. Turns out he was able to get the deal he wanted in Tampa Bay. It's likely where he wanted to be regardless, and he got paid. It's a shame that the organization was kind of dragged along for as long as they were, put him behind the eight ball, but that's the business. Jake took advantage of his leverage. The Hurricanes did what they could to keep him. It didn't work out, and that's why organizations always have a plan B, a plan C, a plan D, and so on and so forth. The Canes did end up losing some players that will be missed, guys that were part of the turnaround, the culture shift, getting back to the playoffs consistently. And number one on that list is Teuvo Teravainen, a player that was loved on and off the ice, was a great Hurricane, came around in the dark days and got to see the Hurricanes make it to 6 consecutive playoffs. The good news is that he didn't end up with the New York Rangers. It was down to the Rangers and the Chicago Blackhawks. He decides to go home to the team that drafted him and that he won a Stanley Cup with. And he's going to have an opportunity to be on a team that is once again ascending. Maybe end up on a wing with a guy like Connor Bedard. It's going to bring talent and playmaking to that lineup. I'm excited to see that for him. I'm sad to see him go. It sounds like the Canes were prepared to move on and weren't seriously entertaining the idea of bringing him back. It's the hard part about hockey, losing guys that you like, especially guys that have been around the organization long enough that have played such a crucial part in the team getting back to the promised land. Second on that list, Brett Pesce, another guy that's been with the organization for a long time, has been a stalwart on the right side. You know, he's just been a good Hurricane. The Canes would have liked to kept him around, but at the end of the day, they were looking for a shorter-term deal, and Pesce's camp wanted the protection of a longer-term deal. He's going to be missed in Carolina. He gets to go home. He'll be playing with New Jersey next year. Not thrilled that we have to see him within the Metropolitan, but once again, that is the business. You know, he gets the right to go where he wants to go. He gets to go back near home, and they're getting a good defenseman. The Canes don't like the career trajectory of players that have the injury history that Brett Pesce does, and they weren't willing to go long-term, and that's how it goes sometimes. Other teams are more willing to take that risk and offload the contract at a later date if they need to. Brady Shea, Brett Pesce's long-term partner on the second pairing, got paid big bucks. Canes were never going to be able to match the deal that Nashville gave Brady Shea. It's honestly one of the more surprising deals. I certainly wasn't expecting that big of a bag for Brady. Happy for the guy. Happy that he was able to go get paid. That's a lot of term and a lot of money. But hey, he's getting paid either way. So congrats to him. It was never really realistic for those dollar amounts to make sense in Carolina. And inevitably, he moved on and is hopping on a team that is looking to make it back into super competitive territory in the playoffs. Nashville went out and was aggressive, acquiring Stamkos and Marchessault, Brady Shea, and so on and so forth. They're a team that looks serious about their business, and I'm just glad that he's not playing in the Eastern Conference. Stefan Nason, Hurricanes reclamation project, seemed like his career was kind of on the fritz. Canes brought him in, was a great match to the system, was a great Carolina Hurricane, loved everything about him, but like I talked about on previous episodes, he has just played himself into a contract that didn't really make sense for the Hurricanes in the long run. They had business that they knew they needed to get done. Steph didn't really fit in that picture. He ends up in New Jersey as well. I think he'll do good things. He's definitely a guy that we'll miss in the lineup. But for where you would play him in the lineup, you can't really pay him the money that he ended up getting in New Jersey. And that's just the theme of the day. That's just business in the hockey world. Dylan Coghlan gets traded to Winnipeg. It never really worked out for him here. Never really got to play a role. Hopefully he gets a chance in Winnipeg to become a full-time NHLer. Evgeny Kuznetsov gets waived for the purpose of contract termination. It is most likely that he's going back to the KHL. I haven't seen an official report of him signing yet, but the expectation is that he'll be playing in the KHL next year. He was due about $8 million this season. 2 of that was already paid in a signing bonus, so he forfeited $6 million to move on. I would expect him to get paid healthily if he goes to the KHL. Last exit, Max Comtois. He also signed in the KHL. Wasn't really a fit. One of the more shocking plays in the playoffs for Rod to put him out there, but he moves on to the KHL. Now that we've gotten the tough part of the podcast out of the way, we can focus on who's coming back, who's been added, and what's next for the Hurricanes. Obviously, based on the exit, there are a lot of holes to fill in this lineup. And at this point, not all of them have been filled yet. We're going to have to see how things shake out in training camp, in preseason. But guys are going to have the opportunity to ascend in the lineup, to play bigger roles. And if they're able to grab the bull by the horns, then it's really theirs to lose. Returning, the one that surprised me, I'll be honest, I did not think there was a chance that we would see Jordan Martinook back. But Jordan Martinook's back. 3 years, $3.05 million a year. We've heard Tulsky talk about how important Rod's input is on building of the roster, and it is very clear that Martinook is a Rod Brind'Amour guy. And you know what? He's been a great Hurricane. He's been a great member of the community. He's getting paid third line money, and he's going to need to produce like that. For a team that's potentially going into a down year, they're going to need the guys that are kept on the roster to all step their game up a notch if they want to be a team that's competing in the playoffs next year. The Canes also bring back Jack Drury. Based on Jack's exit interview at the end of the season, it was very clear that he enjoyed playing with Rod in Carolina with his teammates, that he really wanted to get a deal done. He was scheduled to go to arbitration. The Canes are able to get a deal done beforehand. 2 years, $1.725 million is the figure. A player that's going to be one of those that has the opportunity to take that next step. There's certainly going to be opportunity, and Jack can be a guy that grabs that. He's good in the face-off dot, which is very important to Rod Brind'Amour. He's responsible on both ends of the ice. If he can add some other elements to his game, this is a guy that can establish himself as a middle six player on an NHL roster, which will then set him up for a much bigger payday 2 years from now. At forward, the Canes also bring in a few other guys. Jack Roslovic, 1 year, $2.8 million, low-risk signing, fast player that can create off the rush and is going to have an opportunity to fit into the lineup and maybe be a guy that creates 40 or 50 points a season if he fits in well. Low risk. If it doesn't work out, you're out of the contract in a year. If it does work out, great. Maybe there's a future for him in Carolina. William Carrier, that's the big one for me. We've talked about this forever, for as long as the podcast has been out, that the Canes need to play a heavier style. Rod Brind'Amour loves to forecheck, loves to cycle the puck and score from the point. That means you need forwards that can create loose pucks, that can win back loose pucks, and that can park themselves in front of the net and score some dirty, greasy goals. That's something that Nason was good at. I think Carrier can be just as good as it, and he's also going to add an element the Canes haven't had in a while, and a bona fide hitter. He's going to hit everything he sees. He hits more than Svetch, and I think Svetch threw the most hits for the Hurricanes last year. Exciting addition. Think he's going to help the Canes. 6 years at $2 million. The term is kind of but if you look at how a lot of NHL teams do business, it's a contract you can probably get out of later on if you need to. At forward, there's a couple of depth signings, Eric Robinson and Tyson Jost, both under $1 million, both one-year contracts. These are guys that are probably going to bounce between the AHL and NHL, probably seeing more AHL time if we're going to be honest. But they're good additions. They're guys with NHL experience, and you know how this organization works. They do their homework, and they look for players that fit the system. Robinson and Jost are guys that might be able to do that. We're not going to know until we get to see them in likely training camp and preseason. Now, defensively speaking, huge loss when you lose your second pairing in Brett Pesce and Brady Shea. But I think the Canes did good business. They're ahead of the game bringing Orlov in. Orlov's got one more year on his deal, as well as Brent Burns has one more year on his deal. So they're in a limbo phase now where next season they're going to have near $13 million open up with those two guys' contracts coming off the books. The Canes bring in Sean Walker, 5 years, $3.6 million. It's an interesting addition, a player that's going to be in his mid-30s by the end of the contract. The AAV is appropriate. The question is, where do they see him playing? Is he a guy that can benefit from being next to Jacob Slavin in the future? Or is that spot reserved for somebody like Scott Morrow? Yeah. Are they expecting him to play on the second pair with an Orlov this year? Or are they expecting him to play third pair with Shane Gostisbehere? It's going to be interesting to see how those things shake out. Obviously, I've jumped ahead a little bit. Another addition on the back end, Shane Gostisbehere, 3 years, $3.2 million. It's a player that has experience with the Hurricanes, which is beneficial. We've seen how long it takes defensemen to acclimate to the Canes system. Gostisbehere already knows what it's all about. He's going to jump in and be able to have an impact, produce quite a bit of points. I want to say 56 off the top of my head in Detroit last year. Is going to have a real shot at being the power play quarterback, likely going to be your third pairing left defenseman. But great addition. 3 years, $3.2 million. You can certainly take that term and that AAV. Last but not least, Jalen Chatfield. Love to see him coming back. 3 years, $3 million. I expect him to take another step, but they signed him at what's ultimately third pair money. So if Chatfield is on your second pair with Orlov, fantastic. If he shuffles down to the third pair with a Shane Gostisbehere, still really happy about that. That's a match that I think could play well together too. So defensively, feeling pretty good about where they're at. They got those players much cheaper than they would have got Shea and Pesce combined. They know that they have Nikishin coming in the near future, and they know that they also have Morrow coming in the near future, most likely. So at the end of the day, the organization has set themselves up not to be handcuffed and to be able to play the best lineup going forward. It's good news for the organization as a whole. A few other signings that are likely AHL guys. Joakim Ryan, going to be a defenseman in the AHL. Riley Stillman, same scenario. Son of former Hurricane Corey Stillman. And then when you have one Slavin, sometimes you just want two. The Canes went out and added Josiah Slavin, Jacob Slavin's brother. He will be an AHL mainstay. In addition to those AHL depth players, the Canes signed their second-round pick, Dominic Badinka, to his entry-level contract. It's not a guy that's going to see the NHL anytime soon, but could be in North America as soon as next year or the year after that. It's a player that seems like they have a lot of potential. The Canes traded back knowing that they could likely get him, and were able to get their guy. So excited to see him sign his ELC, and we look forward to what he can bring to their organization in the future. Now, obviously, the two names that we haven't touched on yet are the big names, the guys that the Hurricanes are really drawing out at this point. One being Seth Jarvis. All kinds of reports out there. The Canes seem to want to go to 8 years. I'm hearing all sorts of $8 and $8+ million a year, which would be surprising to me. I had assumed that a Jarvis contract would be in the 8-year, $7.25 range, so $7.25 million. It sounds like it may come in north of that. Who knows? The rumor mill is often inaccurate, but we'd like to see that deal get done sooner than later. And then the elephant in the room, Martin Necas. So much speculation about him all offseason. Sounds like he decided not to sign with Columbus, which is why the Canes trade for the 4th overall pick fell through. Other teams have been given the right to negotiate with him, and he's shown either no interest or couldn't come to agreement with those teams. So at the end of the day, he doesn't want out of Carolina bad enough that he's willing to go anywhere. The Canes did file for arbitration with Necas. In all likelihood, everything points to him starting the season as a Hurricane on either a 1 or 2 year deal. I wouldn't be surprised to see him gone unless things take a really positive turn. Sounds like Necas still wants to be a center. And if Rod doesn't see him that way, I don't really see a possibility of bridging the gap, which means eventually Necas is going to be gone anyways. So you might as well boost his value up a little bit and then trade him as soon as possible if that's the case. If Necas wants to come back and it's more smoke, then great. Come back, earn your roster spot. You're going to have an opportunity to play a lot of minutes. There's a lot of skill opportunities open. There's going to be power play 1 opportunities. There's likely going to be minutes on the first line and second line for him this season, so he's going to be one of the biggest minute getters. He's going to be able to play. It's a matter of what he wants at the end of the day, and if it's going to be a match with how the organization views him. If not, I wouldn't be surprised if we see it be a 1 or 2 year deal via arbitration, and eventually the Canes move on from Necas. A couple rookies to keep your eye on this offseason, going into training camp, going into preseason. Guys that could maybe crack into the lineup at some point. Bradley Nadeau, great flashes last season. He's got a ton of talent. Has one thing that the Canes are desperately lacking, and that's elite goal scoring ability. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Bradley Nadeau get a chance at some point. Jackson Blake, effort guy. Really see him fitting in as like a middle 6 player down the road. I think he plays the majority of this season in the AHL, but is another guy, depending on how the season goes for the Hurricanes, that could get a shot at playing in the NHL. Felix Ungersorum, the organization has already come out and said that he's playing in North America. The question is it the AHL or the NHL? A guy that really impressed in camp last season. If he does it again, he might be a surprise addition to the opening day roster. Ryan Suzuki, a guy that we've talked about cracking into the lineup at some point. Last season was the season it was expected. It didn't happen, but I do think that there's opportunity for him there, and I wouldn't be surprised to see the Canes give him a shot. He's had quite a bit of AHL seasoning, which the other guys lack, which may give him a head up in terms of the opportunity to jump right in. If he can hang with the Ungersorums, the Blakes, the Nadeaus, then there's a good opportunity that he gets the first shot. We'll see. That's my opinion. I know the organization likes a player. We'll have to see how that shakes out. And then defensively, Scott Morrow. It's going to be good for his development to play a lot in the AHL, play big minutes in all situations if possible. But I wouldn't be surprised if there's injuries or whatever for a guy like Scott to make the jump and play a handful of games, if not more, in the NHL next season. It's nearly impossible at this point in time to tell you what the Canes lineups are going to look like next season. Defensively is not super difficult. Likely going to be Slavin and Burns. Rod's stubborn. I don't see them doing the thing I would like them to do, and that's bump Burns down and limit his minutes so that you keep him fresher. It seemed like he just had super heavy legs in the playoffs last year, and at the end of the day, I can respect that. The guy's been in the NHL more than half of my lifetime. So if the guy has to play a little less minutes to get the most out of him, then so be it. I'm totally fine with that. But we know that Rod loves him, and it's likely that we see that Slavin Burns line to start the season again. It could be Orlov Walker. It could be Orlov Chatfield as the second pair. And then whoever isn't on that second pair will be on the third pair with Gostisbehere. So we know what the defense is going to look like. We know it's going to be Kochetkov and Anderson in goal. I would like to see Kochetkov get more of the run. I think you know what you have in Anderson. I think you need to give Kochetkov every chance to be the starting goalie. I think that's the best for your future. He's signed past this season, and this is Anderson's last season. So you really got to see what you have there so that you know what you need to do moving forward. When we're talking about the forward lines, who knows where to start? I mean, you've got Svech, Aho, Jarvis, Necas. Those guys are the only guys really shoot in. If we get Necas and Jarvis back, those are the shoe-ins for the top six. Outside of that, you could see KK as the second line center. You could see Drury playing on the wing of the second line. You could see Roslovich. It's really tough to know how those are going to shake out. And then for the remainder of the bottom six, you got Martin, Stahl, Foss, Carrier, Lemieux, Jost, players like that to fill out the roster. But I am intrigued to see how training camp and preseason goes and what line combinations Rod starts the season with. Are there going to be some of these younger players that crack into the lineup and so on and so forth? It's going to be interesting. When you've invested money in guys like Drury and Martinuk and Roslovich and Carrier, you fully expect them to be in the lineup. I don't see KK going anywhere. The Canes, I think, would have made a serious attempt to move on from him if they didn't think that there was something there. It sounds like they think there's something there. So I wouldn't expect Jesperi Kotkaniemi to be anywhere else. And outside of that, the only question marks are, is Jost going to be an NHL guy? Is Jesper Foss going to be healthy enough? Who knows? It's going to be an interesting couple of months leading up to the season. It should be an exciting time. It's down time for a lot of Canes fans, but the reality is it's a quick reset. The Canes are well positioned for the future, and hopefully some of these young players take the steps that they need to take, and we see a super competitive Carolina Hurricanes team again this year. As things continue to develop, I'll eventually put out another episode once we have stuff worth talking about, really. I don't want to just put out episodes for the sake of putting episodes out. So be on the lookout for that over the next month or so. Hopefully we will get Necas and Jarvis news over the next month. So be on the lookout for that. Otherwise, go Canes.